Hey guys, I'd planned to take us to the park to get some wide angle shots today, but it's been raining for like 3 days, and so now we have flash flood warnings, and so I'm going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to shoot indoors, and I'm going to show you how to do some macro photography on the cheap. I like shooting macro and close-up photography. It's really cool because it allows you to take photographs of things that you can't see with the naked eye. I always hear new photographers say that they don't have anything exciting to shoot, or they don't have access to an exotic location, and that's the very essence of what a good photographer is, right? It's your ability to take pictures of common everyday things and locations and places and shoot them in a way that nobody has ever seen before. Macro photography allows you to do this easily. I mean, you can just go into your backyard or set up a shoot anywhere. Unfortunately, macro lenses are expensive. And if you're seriously dedicated to doing macro photography, then they're worth it, and you should purchase one. But if you just want to experiment and explore a little bit, here are some cheap alternatives that I use to get my macro shots. I'll show them to you, and then we'll take some photos. First, I have the Kinko extension tubes. These are great because they allow you to get closer to your subject. I've heard people online say that they magnify your subject, and that's simply not true. They allow you to get closer to your subject. See, every lens has a minimal focus distance. You can find it online at the manufacturer's website or the documentation that came with the lens. For example, the Canon 50mm 1.8 has a minimal focus distance of 1.15 feet. That's roughly 14 inches. The minimal focus distance is the distance from your camera's sensor to the subject. On the body of your camera, you'll see an icon that is a circle with a line through it. That's the sensor's location, so it's the distance from that icon out past your lens. If you try to autofocus too close to your subject with a shorter length than your lens's minimal focus distance, you won't be able to acquire focus. These extension tubes put a gap between the sensor and the lens, extending the lens closer to the end of the minimal focus distance, thus allowing you to get closer to your subject. It's just a hollow tube, there's no glass or optics inside. And these are the Kinko ones, and they're cool because they have electrical contacts that allow your camera body to communicate with the lens for aperture and autofocus functionality. I got these on Amazon for around $100. They usually come in a set of 3. These came with a 12mm, a 20mm, and a 36mm. The reason they give you different sizes is because you cannot use an extension tube that is larger than your lens's focal length. If you do, you won't be able to acquire focus at all. So say for example, if I was to use the 24mm lens, I would use the 20mm extension tube. If I used the 36mm extension tube, then I wouldn't be able to get focus. One thing to note about extension tubes is that since they allow you to get super close to your subject, the lens is going to block a lot of the light. You'll need to use an off-camera flash, or I use a portable LED light when I'm outside and a softbox when I'm inside. I took this shot of a wasp with the Canon 18 to 135mm and the 36mm extension tube. This wasp was literally touching the end of my lens. Once you start using these, you're going to come to a point where you're going to want magnification. And like I said earlier, extension tubes, they only allow you to get closer to the subject. They don't offer any magnification. To get magnification, you can use my next cheap alternative, the reverse lens method. What you do is you take any lens and you reverse it by disconnecting it and flipping it backwards. I usually do this combining my extension tube and the lens. This helps in protecting your camera sensor. You never want to let anything touch it. That includes your fingers, hands, dust, or any particles that are flying in the air. I put on the extension tube, reverse the lens, and tape it onto the extension tube. Make sure your lens is flush to avoid light bleeding. In this situation, I'm using the 36mm extension tube and a 50mm lens. You can purchase a reverse ring adapter that would screw onto the front of your lens like an ND filter, and then mount the other side of the adapter ring to the extension tube or your camera directly. You can pick them up for $10 or so on Amazon. Just make sure you get the right size for your lens and your camera mount. There are a couple of things to note about the reverse lens method. One, the shorter your lens focal length, the more magnification you'll get. Usually I get what I want from my 50mm, but if I have a tiny subject and want more magnification, I'll use my 24mm lens. Of course, the reverse lens method works best with primes and pancake lenses. The smaller, the lighter, the better. Secondly, since the lens is reversed and not connected to your camera, there's no communication between them. You won't be able to use autofocus or control the aperture. What I do is attach the lens to the camera like normal. I switch the lens to manual focus and I focus as close as I can manually. I then set my aperture to the middle of the lens aperture range. So if the lens has a maximum aperture number of f22, I'll set it to f11. Then I'll press the depth of field preview button, which is located here on my Canon camera. And while I'm holding that button down, I'll remove the lens. It takes 2 hands, so be careful. If you don't do it this way, the lens will automatically return to the widest aperture when you remove it from the camera. Because we're so close to the subject, the depth of field is going to be super shallow. This is why I set the aperture to the middle range. Too low of an aperture number, and I can't get anything in focus because the depth of field is too small. Too high an aperture number, we start to get refraction and lose detail. There is a technique called focus stacking where you take multiple images, shifting the area of focus from the front to the back of the subject. And then you can import those into Photoshop and you can blend them together. But to keep today's video as simple and short to the point as possible, we won't be focus stacking. When using the reverse lens technique, you're going to focus by physically moving in and out on your subject. Since we're dealing with magnification, motion blur is a big issue. You can't freehand, everything must be still. I use a tripod and set my camera to a 2-second delay after I press the shutter button. You can also use a remote if you have one. With it being winter here, there's no insects to shoot, so I went to the grocery store and picked up these flowers. You can get fresh cut flowers year-round at your local market, and they're not that expensive. I got these for $10. I put them on this small table, set up my tripod leaning it against the table so I can move in and out to focus. I placed a softbox light close to the subject. Remember, you do still have access to your camera's ISO and shutter speed to properly expose your shot. Because we've set the aperture to f11, I'm going to set my shutter speed to 1/20 to start out. You'll need to experiment and see what works best for your situation to get the proper exposure. Okay, I can see moisture on these flowers. That's a trip. I'm digging this purple one. God-made things have so much more detail than man-made things, especially at the macro level. Okay, we got some really cool shots. I especially like this one. You can check it out on my Instagram here. Well, that's it for today's video. It was awesome spending time with you and talking about macro. If you like this video, consider smashing that like and subscribe button. I appreciate your support. And until next time, I am Todd Norris. Peace out.